My colleague from Florida, Mr. Rivera, a wise man, staying around.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I learned from the best from you. Madam Secretary, thank you so much for being here today. As you know, recently we marked the 14th anniversary of the February 24th, 1996 shoot-down of the Brothers to the Rescue airplanes, in which, as you know, 4 Americans were murdered over international airspace by the Castro dictatorship. Subsequent to those murders, the U.S. Congress and then President Clinton passed and signed into law the Helms-Burton Bill, which has never been fully implemented, as you well know, because of a provision which allows a waiver or a suspension every 6 months to that law for implementation of that law. And that suspension, I believe, takes place around every January or February and at mid-year as well. So we probably have just recently seen the Obama administration suspend the Helms-Burton law, as it has been done twice a year, every year since 1996. Now, the rationale allowed in the Helms-Burton law for suspending implementation of the law is twofold. Number one, that it serves U.S. interests, and number two, that it would expedite a transition to democracy in Cuba. Given what we've seen in the last few years during the Obama administration of what has been occurring in Cuba in terms of the wave of repression against human rights activists and dissidents, given the deaths of several hunger strikers, given the recent persecution against the ladies in white, peaceful activists in Cuba that have been calling for democratic reform, given the stern rebuff that former Secretary Richardson received in Cuba to his recent overtures or negotiations, can you tell us, just in the last few years of the Obama administration, that the Helms-Burton law has been suspended, how has that expedited a transition to democracy in Cuba?
Well, Congressman, we take a backseat to no one in our condemnation of the denial of human rights that is a continuing feature of the Castro regime, and the particular instances that you mentioned are ones of great concern to us. We do think that increasing people-to-people contact, supporting civil society in Cuba, enhancing the free flow of information, promoting the capacity for more independence economically and politically from the Cuban authorities is in the interests of the Cuban people and is in the interests of the United States.
And we may agree to disagree on that, but I'm just wondering if there's any evidence of results as a result of that policy that the Obama administration has been pursuing. Do we have any evidence at all of any inkling of democratic reform or a movement towards democracy? Is there anything positive that has resulted from the Obama administration policy toward Cuba that we have evidence, tangible evidence?
Well, in the last 3 years, there have been considerable changes in Cuba's economic policies, which we see as a very positive development. We think having the Cuban people given more economic rights to be able to open businesses, to have more opportunity to pursue their own economic futures, goes hand in hand with the promotion of democracy. I wouldn't claim that our movements were a direct cause, but they were coincident with. And very often in oppressive regimes like Cuba, economic freedom precedes political freedom.
Well, then you would agree that if there has been economic freedom, and I dispute that, I don't believe there has been any real economic reforms, genuine economic reforms in Cuba, but if you would agree that if there have been, and we can disagree on that, there certainly have been no political reforms or movement toward democracy, notwithstanding the economic movement.
Well, despite our very strong objection to the treatment of Alan Gross, the in our view, totally unjustified charge and detention, a great number of political prisoners have been released. And, again, that in and of itself is not final evidence of anything. But the fact that so many political prisoners were released in the last 3 years is, in our view,
Are you aware that those
positive move.
those releases were followed by were required by expulsions from the country? You're aware of that. They weren't released into the country.
Well,
they were expelled from the country.
I am aware of that, Congressman, and as I look out over the world and take a historic perspective, I see sometimes that political prisoners are released and expelled where they continue to pursue their democracy work and their advocacy on behalf of human rights from outside the country. So I think the fact is, letting political prisoners go is a very positive development. I wish that they were inside Cuba, continuing to, agitate and advocate for, freedom and democracy. But, their voices are still being heard, especially in the new communications environment in which bloggers and others exist. So
I hope
Thank you,
we'll continue
Mr.
to hear
Rivera.
those voices.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.